good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to listen to it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience, so if at any time you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes near the end of today's webinar to go over the audience questions. We also have 2 polling questions during today's webinar, so hopefully we'll get you guys involved and make it a little more interactive for you. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of the 3 lucky winners today. Okay, with that, we will go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Value Stream Mapping, Stories from the Trenches. Our speakers today are Marc Hornbeek, who is CEO of Engineering DevOps Consulting and author of Engineering DevOps. Welcome, Marc. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of my experiences.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we also have Jeff Keyes, who is VP of Product with Plutora. Hey, Jeff, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday to you too. All right, with that, I'm going to put myself on mute and you guys get to it.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. I love this topic. If you haven't been involved in this webinar series that we've been doing, you're in for a treat. Recognizing that we're at webinar number 3, there's 2 others you ought to take a look at if you're not familiar with doing value stream mapping as a process. The first one we went through is how do you actually get a current state value stream map and laying the foundations for that. And the second one is once you have that current state, you do some analysis and figure out, well, what should the future state be? The purpose of this webinar goes through some retrospectives of looking at a current state and a future state to see what was different and what were some of the tips and tricks that were learned, and see if that helps you in your efforts. Now, the reason that's interesting is because, well, we get to have Marc with us today, and Marc's a longtime consultant and has done a fair bit, including write a book, which is Engineering DevOps. That was great, Marc. I really liked the blueprints, the engineering practices, the templates that you included into it. There's a link here to get it, to look how you can improve your current development processes and by implementing DevOps practices. The reason this is interesting is that every transformational process that you go through at some point will involve a process that ought to be a value stream mapping session if it's not. And really this process we're going to talk about will look at some of the intricacies of doing it. And you'll learn some of these techniques and so forth, but come check out the book. And in your book, Marc, you actually lay out a blueprint at a high level that I thought was interesting, laying out different aspects of what to look at and different pieces of the pipeline and how you actually take it from wherever a company's at now to where they're going forward. Do you want to talk a bit about, this blueprint?
Yeah, so the book, indeed, that's one of the center pieces of the book, is the idea of having engineering blueprints, big picture for the different things of DevOps. This is the biggest picture, if you like, the overarching picture, the way I think about DevOps anyway, in a big picture sense. So, outside the drawing, there's 6 bubbles that talk about the different, purposes or goals for DevOps, agility
Sure.
being the most popular one to get faster time to market or faster cadence of releases. And then, the centerpiece is a kind of an architectural view of all things DevOps, all the different major components of DevOps. Each of the items in there are actually topics unto themselves, but it sort of demonstrates the relationship between them, at least the way I think about it. And at the top of the food chain, if you like, there's value stream management, because you're trying to orchestrate and observe activities all the way through, from planning through to operations, which is at a higher level than the release processes, which is at a higher level than the CI/CD process. And then you have, the infrastructure supporting all of that underneath, and surrounding everything, governance, security, SRE, and disaster recovery. So this is just a big picture, and it kind of puts in context where value stream management sits in the overall architecture, at least in the way I think about it. And that's, maybe gives some context for the way I talk in the rest of this webinar.
Well, it's kind of funny you put this out. There's, if you haven't seen it, there's research that was just released by Gartner last week, even, that is also now jumping onto the value stream management bandwagon. They're calling it DevOps value stream management. Whether you're doing a delivery platform or value stream management platform, this is taking hold. And one of the centerpieces of integrating into this process is, doing value stream mapping, which is a sub piece of managing value streams. So with that, and again, talking about this, the reason why I love this series and having you on, Marc, was simply because you've been doing value stream mapping for a long time. And it's kind of a way that we can have a conversation and folks can peek into, what were some of the learnings that you did. So what are we going to get out of today? What's coming?
Yeah, you're right. I've used value stream mapping methodology, not only for customer consulting engagements, but for a lot of other activities, even as an engineering leader over the years. I just find it a very useful technique, and I do apply it in my own particular way. But today, we'll, just because we're limited on time, it will contain the discussion to 4 real world examples. I can't name the names of the companies, but these are real world companies. So there's an insurance services policy provider, archival services for a religious institution, a USA government services organization, and a financial asset management company. So these are real, actual, current state, future state maps, and with information hidden to protect the innocent, otherwise real. And so we'll talk about the current state, the future state, what the recommendations were that came out of those analysis, at least some of the high level ones. These usually take a lot more time to go through than we have in this webinar. And we'll discuss the rationale for that, and try to give you some tips on how you can do this sort of thing yourself, what some lessons learned.
Perfect. So with that, just as a bit of a refresher, what's a value stream map?
Right. So, and it's not magical, really. I mean, there's books and so on written on this, but the general idea is you break down your activities from the beginning to the end of whatever the value stream is that you're thinking about. The typical, if you like, generic value stream in a DevOps situation is you start with a backlog, and you're going through development, CI, delivery, deployment, and operations. It's almost so-called standard, but there are variations as well. So you do this twice. You map all of these activities out from the point of view of whatever your objectives are. It might be release time, so you map out what's involved in these steps that are affecting time for the current state. So it's sort of a discovery process, and you make a map for the current state of all those things, identifying the things that are contributing to time if it's a lead time analysis. And then the future state is more of a prediction or a recommendation, if you like, of what you would like to get to based on what your goals are. So if your goal was, I don't know, I want my lead time to be 10 days instead of 50 days, then the future state should be set up to accomplish that, and it should identify changes in each of the stages to accomplish that.
Right, and we went through this a lot in the other webinars, like I said, and we can certainly, you can go back and watch those, but why ultimately are these important? Where does this come from? Oh, hang on, let me advance the slide. There we go.
I could have talked to it, but I know you had a slide. So basically, this is the fun part. I really enjoy value stream mapping exercises because it sort of wakes up the teams. A lot of the times folks are in their trenches in their own functional areas, and even though they claim to be cross-functional, maybe they don't have something in common that they can point at that they did together. So a value stream map is something pretty easy to pull together that they can all contribute to in an exercise, and it tends to pull people together, sharing information. You can't really put the map together unless you're sharing information. Not everybody knows everything across the map, so it enables the teams to visualize and have a common sort of one page of what's going on in the value stream, at least relative to whatever the goal is for improvement in the value stream analysis. And then, everybody gets to see how the organization is flowing at any point in time, at least how they think it is. Often they don't really know, but it's a good way to start mapping it out and figure it out. And it can also be, transformed into an actual work to change and alter the delivery pipelines and the DevOps components, which is not just the tools, but people and processes as well. Finally, it gives a pretty clear idea of where to hook in value stream management if you want to automate the value stream orchestration and visibility more.
Right. And and part of that, ultimately, it's getting the whole team aligned on what needs to happen, because agreeing on the problem is the first step, and just getting everybody in a room that's going to talk about that's going to get you a long ways there. But once they agree on the problem, getting them bought into the solution, that's usually where the biggest challenges are. And again,
Exactly.
not to spend a lot of time on this bit, but just to reiterate things that we've talked about in the past. So how do you create a value stream map, and what's the process here?
So we covered this in the other webinars, like you said, so I won't go through every detail here. But the general idea is you essentially do two passes of these 4 steps: current state and then future state. So in the first pass, you're identifying who are the right players to participate. Again, that depends on what the goals are for the particular value stream analysis. And usually it's a cross-functional team of leaders and influencers. And then you prepare them, you explain to them what the process is, and try to get, if it's a current state analysis, then you're looking at discovery activities ahead of the workshop. Conduct a workshop, get everybody together, and collaboratively build a value stream map. And then usually offline, somebody's tagged. Often it's a consultant like myself or somebody else, or a small team that document and analyze and document a result to say, okay, given that information, then what are we going to do about it? You do that 2 passes. First of all, to get a clear idea in the current state of what the current bottlenecks are and lessons learned, and then do it again for the future state. What are the recommendations, and what are a roadmap to implement those recommendations?
Perfect. So that takes us to, we actually have a polling question that we wanted to ask, if we can push that poll live and just take a second. You should have that poll now and be able to respond to it.
Yeah.
So take a second and just, we have quite a number of people that are on today. So wanted to get your sense of what you're looking for. Why do you want to do value stream mapping? What's your goal at the end of the day? What do you want to get out of it? And we'll just let this go for just a couple more seconds. It's interesting, different people have different understanding of why you actually do value stream mapping, and so the goals vary. But I think we can almost close that up now.
While we're waiting, I just want to remind the audience that if you do have a question for our panelists, please, you can submit your question anytime using the GoToWebinar control panel. Let me know when you want me to close it.
I think we're good. I don't see it changing anymore. So survey says.
Survey says. There you go.
So, wow. So 36% want to find bottlenecks for efficiency, want to find lead time bottlenecks, a few on the quality, and would like to just have a common reference to knowing what in the world's going on. I think all of these are good answers, and frankly, all of these are possible. So with that, you're going to see, so let's dive into the meat of today. The first one, if we can go ahead and close that out, if you can see my screen, assuming you can. The first one we're going to dive into, give us a little bit of background on this insurance provider, and how did you come to talk to this insurance provider? And then we'll get into look at their value stream map and some of the things you found.
Well, it's a nationwide insurance provider in the USA, very well known, and they basically approached consulting because they knew they had an issue. They were trying to understand why their DevOps tools were not performing DevOps adequately.
Right.
They had a pretty good
It's like,
tool
hey,
chain.
we implemented that thing. We started automating this thing. We're not seeing anything better. And how many developers and what's the geography? What were some of the things that were really blaring when they called?
Well, okay, so they had a centralized tool team that, were proud of their tool chain, but that tool chain was serving 3 different geographic locations. And I don't know the exact number of developers, but it was in the hundreds. I don't think it was in the thousands. And the operations team were also in the hundreds. There was one major data center, and they were in the process of doing a cloud migration as well. So fundamentally, there was a so-called DevOps group that was responsible for the tools.
Right.
And they were being challenged that, hey, how come we're not getting these big bang DevOps results that people talk about? Well, obviously, it's because it's more than just about tools.
Right.
But,
and that's so common too. We see that all the time. It's like, oh yeah, we're doing DevOps. That's that team over there that defines it. So, whatever they define, everybody else is just going to adopt and make it happen. And it's like, oh, it's not going to be that easy. And
well, engineers love to work with tools, and working with people is a little harder.
Right.
That's why we went to engineering school, right?
Right. Exactly. So, and their problems were around release bottlenecks. What was that about? What does that mean?
Well, the simple answer is that they weren't able to get releases out very quickly. They're late, majorly late on releases, and they're trying to figure out how can we. DevOps apparently is able to improve the cadence and speed of releases, so maybe there's a solution there. Let's look deeper into what we're doing with our DevOps. That was kind of the idea.
Gotcha. So then the consultants are called, you come in and you do up a value stream mapping. And when you set up the value stream mapping session, how long did you set it up for, and what did that look like?
Current state map, the actual workshop is usually 2 to 3 hours, and we develop the information together. But the preparation was more like a week to gather the information for the current state and discover the current situation, and then to get agreement around the goals with the leaders, because a lot of people jump into value stream mapping without actually thinking about what the heck is the goal. I mean, you've got to decide what your goal is. You don't do a value stream map in general. You do a value stream map relative to specific goals.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just all over the place. So yeah, so it's about a week prep, a few hours on together. Doesn't have to be everybody on site, but it's nice if they are. They can be remote. The way I do it, you can do it remotely. And then offline about 4 hours to produce some kind of recommendation, and a second pass to do future state. It doesn't take as long because you've already got the information. You don't need to do a week-long, and now preparation. A lot of it can be done offline. So the future state is usually just getting together for an hour or so with the consultant's recommendation to make sure everybody agrees that is a reasonable future state, recommendation.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Here's the meat. So this is what you created. Take us through this, where when you got all the metrics and so forth, how did you identify some of the bottlenecks?
So again, different people do these things differently. Some use like sticky papers and all that on the. I literally just use PowerPoint, and I have a template. You'll find that in my book, in fact. But the general idea is you map out the stages, and then you identify relative to the goal. In this case, it was a goal to reduce lead time from 45 days to 10 days from the point of view of code check-in until deployment. So that was the specific goal. When you map out, all the different steps involved from planning through to deployment, you start identifying where there are big bottlenecks. Some of the observations were interesting. Frankly, and this is not unusual, going into a meeting with especially a large organization like this, they don't have the data. Like, the data is in different pockets of the organization. Sometimes you got leaders in the room that don't have it, and they have to call out to get the information. Often it's just an estimate. They don't have it measured. So you're dealing with estimations. So I don't get too hung up on the accuracy of the information, as long as it's relatively accurate, relatively speaking. in the ballpark, and also the folks in the room agree that that is reasonable. There's often a lot of surprise. One side is surprised that the other side takes so long for their stages.
Right.
It's very, even gasping. But you literally sit down and you from front to end and enter, what are the stages, what are definable stages, and what are the activities that are contributing, taking away or as contributing bottlenecks to the goal, which in this case is lead time. So where there are big time entries, those are the areas that you want to really focus in on. In this case, you can see that the testing aspects of the whole value stream were not part of planning. They were an afterthought, and then immediately testing activities forked off between a bunch of QA teams, multiple teams, and development, so they didn't really collaborate very much in testing. And then after the fact, the QA organization ran tests and fed back results to the surprised developers that thought everything was perfect. And finally do deployment, but because there was a release problem, they had very little information on the deployment side because they hadn't done a deployment successfully very often, is the truth. So those are key observations. Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of, so in that 10 days, 20 days, 55 days, what kind of things were that was part of their test planning, and so they were creating a series of test plans and automation for that, or what was taking so long in that spot?
Well, in the planning end of it, it was just the QA organization was literally in different parts of the organization, some of them even offshore.
Gotcha.
So they were essentially relearning what the developers were doing. They had to essentially be trained. So they weren't part of the planning process. They weren't very well integrated into development. So communication between development and the QA teams, multiple teams, was lacking. It was almost like a third party type of situation where they had to learn from each other in order to create test plans that made sense, and then automate the tests where they could. And that was another major bottleneck. They really hadn't embraced automation. So there was a very small percentage of tests that were being automated, which also created a lot of delays later. And also the test environments were not organized to such an extent that they could just fire up, quickly a test environment or release it when they didn't need it, depending on what was being tested. It was all very manual. And the communication between the ops teams and the developers and the testers was pretty manual as well. So this is a pretty classic case where, honestly, the testing strategy was the major weakness that was contributing to delays.
And then that testing strategy created a situation where the end-to-end test was taking an enormous amount of time because now they're trying to just play catch up and do it all manual.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you present these observations? What did you do to get moving forward to the future state, and how did you present this to them?
Well, during the current state discussion, it wasn't so much me presenting, it was them, coming up with comments that were pretty clear to everybody in the room. I didn't have to present it. I mean, I did take notes and echo back in the later results readout after we did the future state and the results, but the presentation was more interesting at the end, beyond the current state. But, there was more people in the room for the results readout and some more senior executives, and there was some surprise and gasps going on when we did that.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh.
That can be quite controversial, honestly, and even frightening to some people when you get to that point where you're feeding back the flaws in the organization, and in this case, it was in fact a little troublesome. I usually wear body armor when I go into controversial recommendation readouts.
Understood. How much of the ideas for the observations came from the current state, of what you were going to do in the future state? Was that kind of in process, or was there like a go away and think about it, or how did you end up doing that?
Well, this slide is all about current state, so this is all current state information. The future state really just focusing on solutions that take into account what those observations and bottlenecks are. So it requires an experienced person that have done this before. If a lot of organizations try to do future state value stream analysis without an experienced leader. I think that's a mistake. You know, you really want somebody that has done this a few times before successfully and got some good results. It does take experience. There's a lot of information across this entire, you know, east-west and even north-south, you know, diagram. Drawing from experience helps a lot. So that's where this comes from, helping the audience, you know, the transformation team feed back to them in, you know, concise terminology what they're telling you. Whether they said it that way or not is very helpful. If you can boil it down to a few key observations like this that they all can agree to or change if they don't agree, because you really don't want the result to be anybody except the organizations themselves in the end. The consultant is, you know, shouldn't be the consultant's result, it's the organization's result. But the consultant helps pinpoint how to describe it in a way that they can accept.
Perfect. Well, moving on to what was the solution then. So as you went through this, you had these observations, you got everybody to agree on the problems, and then what did you say? How did it go for coming up with the future state? And let's describe some of the key areas that you dug into.
Well, yeah, maybe my own bias. Frankly, I suspect that, you know, if different consultants do this exercise, they'll come up with different solutions. There is no one solution, first of all, right? And I wouldn't even say that there's an optimum solution necessarily. It's pretty hard to prove there is. You're working with information that is not 100% accurate. The resolution is questionable, but you know, you try to come up with something that will meet the goal, and you even question the goal, right? If they want to reduce 45 days to 10 days when they have been having trouble even getting a release out at all, is pretty aggressive. But if they really want 10 days, then you're going to have to produce a pretty aggressive looking future state, and then the actions and recommendations related to that are going to have to be very aggressive and potentially expensive as well. But you know, the customer is always right.
Yep.
And so this is a future state diagram that would, in my opinion, accomplish the future state of 10-day lead time. To get that, however, there's a lot of changes required. 10 days is, you know, that's a pretty major change. You're not going to, it's not going to happen, first of all, in one DevOps, you know, journey phase. It's probably, you know, even aggressively more than a year's plan, maybe 3 or 4 phases of work to really implement this, and 2 or 3 releases of activities. In this case, you know, shortening up the front end, getting the testing more involved in the backlog process, introducing more modern methods like test-driven development, so that the developers and the QA folks are more tightly coupled right from the beginning, and introducing some better tooling, like they hadn't had source code analysis or static analysis or any of the automated tools applied to source code, which will help speed up the identification of problems, so don't have as much shifting right instead of left. And then triggering testing at the CI level, integrating acceptance testing, you know, ahead, where you're producing automated tests for acceptance testing, and more streamlining the acceptance test process with real users ahead of time. So you're sort of shifting left as much as you can, and then delivery, automating the meeting processes that were very, very manual. Like release acceptance review was totally manual. Well, with value stream management, you can automate that, and then the deployment can be also automated with scripts. And so that's kind of the major pieces. There's a lot of things that have to change for this to happen, but 45 days to 10 days is really aggressive. And it's not surprising, it shouldn't be surprising to anybody that, you know, it takes some pretty aggressive moves and some significant investment to accomplish that big of a change.
Yeah. How was, when you presented this, how was it received, and how did the team react to talking through some of these aspects and starting to, you know, break this down into next steps?
Do you want to go to the next slide or just talk through it here?
Oh, yes, I do. Sorry. The solution advice and taking this through. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So the advice that was presented was, you know, to rearrange the workflow stages that would allow for more streamlining. It's interesting, these workflow stages ultimately tend to be fairly similar from one organization to the next. They start from a very disparate current state, and often the recommendation is to come to something pretty consistent on the future state, because there is, you know, a pretty well-known approach for, you know, optimizing DevOps in that sense. Improving the development and QA communication was a big one in this case. You know, there's offshore communication, there's even inter-team communication, maybe even reorganizing the developers to be more tightly coupled. I've got a message here, recording stopped. Are you guys there?
It's still going. It's still going.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right. Okay. Put in place containers so that they can orchestrate their test environments, and then test environment orchestration tooling and services. Putting in place release measures so that each stage has some entry-exit criteria, and the final stage doesn't need a lot of manual, analysis to figure out whether you got a good release or not.
Right.
Automating that approval process. So those are the major components of the solution. The advice, like I've mentioned before, it's not just a matter of tooling, it's people, process, and tech.
Right.
These are almost generic advice. You could almost cookie cutter this for different organizations, but there are differences from one to the other as well. So it almost always involves leadership to implement the advice. Often that's a committee rather than just an individual, because you want cross-functional buy-in. Mm-hmm. You want to drive the strategic goals, and to do that, you're going to need investment. You're going to need people that are overseeing the roadmap, making potentially organization changes, in this case with QA and development, putting in place training programs that affect the culture, process, and the technology, and sometimes there are incentives as well. The process, in this case, stage definitions and the entry-exit criteria need to be put in place, so there's some process engineering.
Yep.
Putting in place continuous QA, automation, deployment as code, so the policies even, and then the tech side, communication tools to be more consistent between the different teams, value stream management, test automation, and test tools. So these are the big picture items. I mean, the actual readout was more in depth than this, but that gives you the general idea. How did it go when we did the readout? There were a lot of surprises and gasps. The folks that were involved in the workshops weren't so surprised, even though, during the workshops, there were a lot of folks, trying to accept the information they were hearing and contributing to. But for the most part, what I find is if you go through the process well, the results are usually accepted, and whether they actually implement them is yet a different question, right?
Right.
But I've rarely had a case where if you go through this process correctly, they'll say, no, this is wrong. What I have had are other circumstances where some senior manager comes in at the last moment and says, yeah, this all looks right, but we did the work on the wrong application. And therefore, yeah, one thing you discovered here is more important than this, and that is maybe you discovered along the way that they don't have disaster recovery or something, and all of a sudden a DevOps project becomes a disaster recovery project because they have a limited budget. So those things tend to happen. In this case, there was a lot of concern about the effectiveness of the QA strategy and how it needed to be reworked, and to the fairly drastic extent to which it needed to be changed to really get DevOps working properly. The folks that started the effort, the DevOps tools team, definitely saw that, why the tooling alone was not sufficient to get the results that, DevOps can accomplish when it's done effectively and engineered appropriately.
Right. Very good. We have more content than we're going to make it through today. Our next one was looking for value stream management for QA bottlenecks. You want to give us a bit of background on this?
Yeah, so this was a very different situation, a much more smaller team, more confined, much more, involved in DevOps in a bigger picture, in a broader sense. They were certainly very aware that it was more than just, tooling required to do things. And they were pretty clear from the get-go where their biggest bottlenecks were. So it didn't take long to achieve a goal. There are some other issues though that I'll talk about.
Well, let's just dive into those.
Yeah.
So you did a current state value stream map, and what did you find?
So first of all, the current state was not too bad. 14 hours for the time to check in code to deployment was,
that's not bad.
Fairly efficient. It was a smaller team, so that does help when you don't have a lot of waste with inter-team member communications going on. And a lot of it was confined to that one team. There wasn't a lot of ops activity even required because of of the nature of the organization. They had control over the pretty much even the deployment end of the process within one team. So that makes it a lot more efficient. So it's very different than the last case. They also had pretty clear goals, and they were really motivated to improve. There was some pressure to improve the cadence of releases, more for their own benefit, to make sure they're producing good quality code. It wasn't so much that customers were demanding it to be faster. In this case, it was more, recognition that having faster release time can actually improve other things like quality, and be able to innovate faster.
Sure.
So they're already, pretty well steeped in learning DevOps practices. They were very eager. Part of the reason they approached us was the fact that they wanted to learn more about how to do things more effectively. They were already well on their way. Again, in this case, a lot of the bottlenecks were, QA testing related. Some of the deployment aspects were manual. Not all. They already had done some things there. A lot of the test setup was manual as well. So that's where where we targeted solutions to try to get their goal down to 6 hours instead of 14 hours.
Cool. Well, what'd you find? What'd you come up with?
Right. So test orchestration automation was a big one.
Cool.
Trying to bring in TDD so that they could, go directly from not just TDD at the unit test level, but also the functional level. So you write functional tests in parallel with the code, or even ahead of the code, as a way to describe what you're going to do. And that was pretty well accepted. Automating the analysis and kickoff of some of their system level tests, regression and performance, was another way we could cut out some time, and then automating the deployment process a little more, and post-deployment validation with just some scripts. That seemed to be enough to get down to 6 hours. And this was very satisfying because I did a follow-up workshop 6 months later, and it had all been accomplished exactly as was laid out this way. So that was very satisfying, actually.
That's pretty cool.
Fact, pretty unusual, but yes.
I noticed they also went more towards, checking in on trunk and moving forward with a single trunk, which is also part of that improving. So let's talk through, some of the key points here.
So a lot of it is very similar to the recommendations. It's just the emphasis was a little different. I already mentioned, rearranging the stages to be more of a traditional, value stream pipeline, CI/CD pipeline. So putting testing more upfront, automating more tests in the test setup, and the deployment environment automating. So leadership was a lot more, smaller set of people. So it didn't really require much of a committee, but it was leadership driving the changes, incentives, and all of that still applied, and didn't require such a big budget, but there was still part of it. Probably the biggest difference between this set of advice and the last one that I just presented was introducing test-driven development more strongly, because they were more ready for that as a next phase rather than as some later phase in the journey. And the orchestration of the test environment was also something that was, emphasized. Release policies as code.
Like it.
Overall, this was pretty well accepted. Again, I rarely find that the organizations say, "Yep, this is the wrong answer." Like I say, what tends to happen instead is they say, "Yeah, this is a pretty good answer, but maybe we, don't want to do it for some other reason. Like what you found is that we have some bigger problems that are going to be ahead of it, or maybe they'll find out that this looks right, but we have some other applications that we probably should apply this to instead." Because you're usually doing it around one particular application, a model application or something like that.
Absolutely. Well, and you have to kind of live it in order to, you've got to experience it so you can learn and grow and prove that it actually worked for you, which is spot on. Moving along, boy, we're going to run out of time. So it's a government and they're dealing with off the shelf. Give me some background. What happened here?
Yeah, so again, we were approached, the question was, we here at DevOps can help us, been involved in some other, the leadership had changed and they were aware that DevOps can, produce some pretty good results if, when implemented, but there was a major unknown. They didn't understand whether DevOps could be applied when you've got when a lot of the content of the is commercial off-the-shelf systems rather than homegrown, or engineered systems that are engineered.
Cool. Well, and I know there's questions coming in. If we run out of time, will there be recording? Yeah, this is all being recorded. This is really fun. Do ask whatever questions you have. We'll make sure to have some time so that you can poke Marc with different questions or different aspects of the solution. So get your questions in. All right. Well, we get to current state. So what was happening? Give me the lowdown. This is there's the good, the bad, and well, then there's probably some of this, right?
Marc, did we lose you? Are you with us? Well,
did we lose him?
I think we lost Jeff. Hold on, let me check and see. Marc, his microphone's it's still green, but I don't hear him. Marc, can you hear me? Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know if while we're waiting for Marc to come back, if maybe there are a couple questions here that you can start answering, Jeff.
I can. In fact, what I can do is kind of jump to some of the end, and when we get Marc back, I can walk through some of the bits of why Plutora is here and how this relates. I think you're getting an idea of before and after state, and certainly we can do other calls and other sessions like this. Happy to share out the slides, and you can look through all these things. So all that will be available. If I were to jump to the end, and as soon as Marc gets back online, we'll bring him back in here. Let me take you through some more of these. There's a lot of solution advice. Well, let me take you through some bits. Let's go through the second survey questions, because I'd love to know what's stopping you from doing value stream mapping sessions. What is it that's slowing you down today? What struggles are you having? Because we would like to help you with that. So I want to understand a little bit what's making it hard. So if you take a second and comment on this and figure out what's slowing you down.
And also, while we're waiting, just one final reminder for the audience that if you have a question for Jeff, and hopefully Marc, if he's able to rejoin us, please go ahead and use the GoToWebinar control panel. And also, whatever questions we don't get to during the webinar, please know that Jeff and Marc will be getting a copy of all the questions. So I am sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline. So don't not submit your question because you don't think we'll have time for it.
Yep. And part of this is, I'm available at Plutora, and Marc is available at Engineering DevOps. So, do get a hold of us because we'd like that. So we can close the poll now, because I think we're pretty much there. Looks like most people are saying, hey, we're not sure how valuable this effort is.
That's interesting.
We might have higher priority problems. And a fair bit on lacking the skills. I can tell you that in any effort you do, the ROI of the effort is matched almost equally between finding the solution and getting the team aligned behind the solution. Oftentimes, it's not a matter of agreeing that there's a problem, it's agreeing on which problem, and it's getting an alignment that we as a team can actually solve the problem. You'll find that there's different factions that want to focus on different aspects, but if you can do a value stream mapping session, the ROI will simply be because you got people together on solving a particular set of problems, and that success builds success. So once you've done it once and you run an iteration where you've gone through and fixed some things, you'll find that it just gets better from there.
I think Marc is back.
Yeah, so I didn't know. I guess my link went down. I don't know why. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's all right. So, and when we are engineering a solution for anything, Marc, I mean, it's more than just, there's tactics that you have to implement for making improvements. And do you want to talk a bit about that and the dimensions that you have to look at?
So Are you on the right slide? Yeah, the people, process, and technology. I think I've covered that. You know, a lot of folks, especially engineers, tend to think it's all about tools, but you better think about more than that, or you're not really going to get the results that you expect. I think that's a mantra that DevOps has espoused since the beginning, but it's true.
Correct. Which takes
There's
us
a
really
reason.
to the key tips, the
Right.
the things for people to think about. So I think this is like as you're looking at your own value stream mapping exercises or improving your pipelines, I'm guessing you're going to hit a bunch of these. So take us through these.
Yeah. So doing this work does require experience. You shouldn't just look at the tools. You should also look at the technology of the product itself. You might have to orchestrate services in the products to get information out of them. You may have to re-architect the systems to really get flow working well. If you've got a big bottleneck, let's say in CI, where builds are taking too long, you need to split up the system into smaller parts, and then you have to have packages that support those individual parts in the process and so on. So don't just look at tooling, and don't just look at the technology of tooling, look at the technology of the systems themselves, which again gets interesting. If you've got a COD system, you have to involve the vendors.
Right.
That's a big mistake if you don't, because they have control over a lot of it, and surprisingly they will cooperate if you ask them to in many cases. But if not, then you got to work with what you got, or decide to choose a different vendor. Scaling is also really critical. If you're looking at the infrastructure, maybe to speed things up, you can do some more horizontal scaling or vertical scaling to get things going faster. If you just can't get things to be broken into smaller modules,
Sure.
focusing on solutions that will be most improving the end-to-end is the key, right? I mean, you might find something that will improve a stage, but that's a big mistake if it's not going to improve. And keep an end-to-end perspective of the value stream in mind, because that's really the point. It's not to improve the speed of one particular stage. You can speed up, let's say builds, but if the testing takes too long, it's not going to really give you an overall end-to-end benefit. Make sure you estimate the effects of any recommendations you make. Try to quantify it as much as you can, because in the end, somebody's going to have to approve the project. Yep. Roadmap the solution. You're probably not going to accomplish it all in one leg in the journey. It's going to take some phases, and make sure you include some reassessment along the way, because as you implement things, you may come up with other ideas or problems that you didn't know when you went through it the first time. So a reassessment, do the value stream map exercise again. It doesn't take as long the next time because you've already got more information, presumably, but at each major leg in the journey, do it again.
Yep. Well, and as you look at the kinds of things you're going to go solve, there's a bunch of different aspects that you could look at, like we're talking about. There's different aspects that you would look at from what kinds of problems do I want to solve. Maybe you can just mention these, and we'll move on. We got a bunch of questions, so I want to make sure we get time for those.
Yeah, so there are different goal types depending on the value stream. Agility is certainly the most popular one, where they want to, your customer wants to speed up the time from X to Y so that they get more agility. But there are sometimes other goals. In the survey, some people were more interested in security, for example, or efficiency. There are almost a generic set of value stream maps that are optimized around these different goals. So if it's an agility one, like most of the ones we just gave as examples were of that nature. So you tend to be looking at reorganization, skills improvement, optimizing the pipeline, and tooling for orchestration of value stream management. But if it's more like security, then obviously the securities, I'm going down the list here, I'm not going to go through every one, but it'd be more about security training and continuous security processes and security tools, right? So the recommendation matrix is going to be, more along the lines. It's not an absolute chart that gives you a general idea of, how the recommendation would vary depending on what the goals are.
Yep. So I hope you've gotten a lot out of this. Let me tell you why Plutora is here. And we're going to get into a bunch of different bits here, but I just want you to understand that managing value streams, regardless of where you are on your DevOps journey, is critical. And value stream management as a category of solutions is taking hold, and more people are moving forward. Forrester came out with a wave on it in 2018, at the end of 2018 actually, and it's continued to take off. Gartner just released last week DevOps value stream management as a research bit. Highly recommend taking a look at it. I would expect further announcements there, but I know both Forrester and Gartner are moving this direction. Why? Tooling is not enough. We're already been in tooling forever. Agile's been around for a long time. DevOps has been around 10 years. We're still not making enough progress, and the reason being is because we haven't solved some of the culture, some of the process around it, and that's the foundation of you've got to do more than just automate. And using value stream, systems thinking to look at the individual tools that are there and pulling the data together and correlating and gathering metrics at every state and every stage of delivery, and then having a system for continuous improvement. That's the point. That's what value stream management platforms do, of which Plutora is one. Excuse me. and if you had to look at the aspects of our platform, there's sort of three layers of what we do. We pull the data in, we normalize it and correlate it, and give you the ability to then look at the relationship between your planning data to your release data to your verification and test data, and how the whole process goes through, so we can model it and we can give you those metrics of delivery. We also have workflow and orchestration to help the process of delivery, for whether it being managing the actual release and scoping and the pipelines that come along with it, or the deployments, or the environments and improving those environments, going from static to ephemeral, and all the metrics of delivery, because that's what's important. With that, I want to make sure we have time for questions. The key thing being is, if you need help in any of these areas, please give us a call, send us an email. Don't try to just think I can just do this on my own. We'll be here to help. You can use us in a number of different fashions. Obviously, Plutora, we're a software provider. We're a cloud-based solution that bring all this stuff together. We work with a number of consultants. Marc is one of the consultants we work with, and you can actually use Marc as part of your journey of moving forward your development methodology. And he's a proven success, and you can go forward there. So with that, let me get to a couple of questions. Let's see, how do you resolve the conversations of what's working and what's not, and getting people aligned to, I'm paraphrasing and putting my words on what's here, but what works for getting people aligned on the new solution?
Well, honestly, the primary factors tends to be having some senior leaders in the room that were, prepped to try to make the workshops work and not get into disagreement, and to make sure that the participants, are prepared, so that they know that they're getting into a blameless environment, but not an environment that is intended to be confrontational, so that they're working, in a way that is constructive. So that's the first step. And then having a leader running it that can paraphrase the discussions in a way that, listening to the comments and trying to paraphrase the results in a way that, weave together the different ideas without being too biased towards one approach or another, unless there's a strong reason to be. So that's the experience of the consultant or the leader of the exercise is really important, coupled with the leadership of the organization, to make sure that you stay on, a constructive phase, because indeed you can get into a lot of controversial arguments and going down a rat hole if you like, if you don't.
Love it. There's a question about what are recommended VSM value stream mapping resources for beginner, and maybe value stream management for beginners. What's your recommendation on value stream mapping? And I'll have some for value stream management.
Well, of course, I'm biased in this case, so I'd say look at my book. It's there are a number of sections in there. Plutora was a sponsor of the book, and we definitely made sure that there's a significant amount of information there about how to do value stream mapping, and how also to apply it, how to apply value stream management to support that. So that's one resource. The webinar series that was sponsored by Plutora is another, and I'm not just trying to say that. The DevOps Institute has a value stream mapping course. Definitely there are courses on resources like udemy.com and various things like that. So I think all of those are examples of resources. If you are a leader in the organization with some budget, then bring in a consultant to do some consulting to help do some training is a good way to do it. Go through some sample exercises, before you get into the real one would be kind of cool.
Yep. And if you need more connecting the dots, my email is here. Sorry, Mark, I missed putting your email out there, but shoot me an email. I'll get you connected with wherever you want to go. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'd like to see pipelines do better, however that is. And I have a number of different connections, and please email me. We'll help you get connected with whatever you need. On the value stream management side, like I said, there's the Forrester Wave, there's a NowTech report that was done, there's a number of different resources that we have available on the Plutora website. The Gartner bit is called, the one that was just released last week is called The Future of DevOps Tool Chains. It replaces the automated release orchestration as that magic quadrant rather is going away and will be replaced by this. So a lot that is coming. This is a hot area and is going to only get hotter. Let's see, there's a question. Well, there's a lot of questions. I'm gonna have to parse these. There's questions about, can we get the slides? Yes, we'll get all the slides. I would like to see the second slide for the value stream mapping for the not homegrown environment. We have a lot of off-the-shelf applications, wondering how to improve or use this method with these applications. Not sure if I follow that one exactly, Mark. Does that make sense?
No, but you're welcome to go onto my calendar and book a 20-minute chat. We can talk about that because I'm not sure I understand. It sounds like it needs a more in-depth discussion.
Yeah, by all means. I think a lot of this is, don't be shy, get a hold of us. We love talking about this stuff. That's why we're here doing a webinar. How do you, let's see, I can't emphasize enough the importance of Marc notation of handoff times in the model, dealing with value stream mapping and the handoffs between things. It isn't just the cycle time that matters when doing these projects, but the handoffs between them. You have any comment on that, Marc?
Yeah, certainly, and that was demonstrated in some of these examples, the interstage timing, the refining the exit criteria for a stage and the entry criteria for the next stage and the setup time. I tend to focus on testing setup because I find that's where the biggest source of waste is, standing up and tearing down test environments. But there can be other sources of delay as well, certainly meetings that are required in order to process the exit criteria before you can agree on whether the entry criteria has been satisfied to move to the next step. There's a lot of, orchestration of, in effect, meetings and policies is another good one. So I agree, the interstage process and wait times are key to the whole process of reducing bottlenecks.
Probably the last question. Can you let us know how to avoid getting bogged down in process mapping as opposed to value stream mapping? How do you keep the customer from getting bogged down in the process, which can easily become a blame game?
So a process map is more just, you put together everything needed to accomplish, the release, if you like, in the case of a CI/CD pipeline situation. Whereas a value stream map is very, very, very specific to a goal. You first of all need to agree on what the goal is, and you're not trying to build an entire process map. You're really trying to decide, what are the things that are specific to that goal that are contributing to this, the bottlenecks in each stage, and then the the handoff between stages, as we just discussed.
Cool. And as a note, if you want to see the other webinars where we go through that, there's a page on our website where we've got the other 2 webinars, and Marc's book is available there as well. So you can go there and get that. What tool do you use to map the value streams?
I just use PowerPoint. I have a few templates there on my website. The book points to them, but different people use different things. I find the simple PowerPoint is very easy. You can drag and drop boxes and add comments very easily in front of everyone. And so by the time you're finished with the workshop, you pretty much have it already documented and everybody's already seen the document. Offline, all you have to do is pretty it up a little bit. But I'm sure that there certainly are, in an industrial sense, there are a lot of value stream mapping tools that are, I think, personally way too complex for this particular application. If you were doing a value stream on a real manufacturing line, you probably would need more like a process engineering tool. But for what I do, there's usually no more than 10 to 15 stages. You can stuff it on a PowerPoint, get it presented in front of everybody. It's a good way to do it.
And what we find people doing is they use Plutora for getting some of the metrics of delivery. They'll normalize it and say, oh, I know that Plutora says we're dealing about this amount of time. We actually think really it's more like this amount of time. And so they're just adjustments that are made to it, that the actuals stop mattering as much as what the estimated is. With that, we're over time. We better
Yeah.
back to you on finishing this up.
Yeah, I hate to be the bad guy, but yeah, we do need to close this down. As I said before, if we didn't get to your question, please know that Jeff and Mark will get a copy of all the questions, so they'll follow up with you offline. Before we do close things out, we do have a drawing for 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. So I'm going to do that very, very quickly. So David P., Kara B, and Carmen G will be reaching out to you via email to get your gift cards to you. So congratulations on being our 3 big winners today. Want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, you will be able to listen to it on demand. We will be sending out an email later on today that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. Jeff and Mark, thank you both so much for a great presentation as always. You guys should start booking these for like 90 minutes or even 2 hours, because I think you need much more time than what you have right now. So give that a good thought. And also want to thank the audience for joining me today. Guys, have a great day. This is Charlie Nohanlon, and I'm signing off.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
everybody. Bye.